So when it comes to aquascaping, what makes one aquascape awesome and another aquascape terrible? This one I would consider to be terrible. This one I would consider to be awesome. This one I would consider to be terrible. This one I think is awesome. This one I think is awesome. This one I think is terrible. And this one I would consider to be awesome. There's a few simple things that you can do to take your tank from boring to awesome. I'm not talking about complicated things like competition level aquascaping. I've kind of narrowed it down to just a few simple tips and tricks to make an aquascape go from boring to awesome. I'm going to be completely redoing that first tank that I showed you and making it awesome. And I'm super excited because I'm tired of looking at it, and I want to take you along for the ride and show you some of the things that I'm going to do that's going to make it look great. And I hope you think it looks great too. So let's go. Let's take this terrible tank from boring to awesome. Now that you've seen the final product, I want to talk about some of the design elements that go into making an aquascape amazing. But first, going back in time, I'm going to show you how I made it from start to finish. And the first step to redoing any tank is taking out the previous inhabitants and taking out all the sand and cleaning the whole tank top to bottom. So first, we're going to work on that. So the first recommendation I have to take your aquascaping to the next level is not have a bare background on your tank. Always paint your backgrounds. Even if you have a nice wall behind it or something, it just goes a long way to be able to hide cords and lines and things like that. Plus it just helps accentuate the colors of the fish. When you have a solid background that the fish can be up against, you can see the fish a lot better. I would highly recommend not painting your backgrounds white, which is what I have done with this tank, and I hate it. I did it on a few tanks and I regretted every single one of them. The reason being is that it doesn't make the fish stand out very well, and also it is an algae magnet. It helps reflect the light a lot better, so there's just more light in the tank. This tank wasn't as bad. I've had some that were worse in the past, but it still just doesn't do justice for the way the fish look. So I would go with black, would probably be my #1 recommendation. Blue is not bad either, although I think there's some varied opinions on that. I think blue looks fine. You can never go wrong with black. So paint it black, the colors of the fish will stand out. So what I'm gonna do right now is I'm gonna get scraping and get rid of this white background, and then we're gonna repaint it black. After about 10 minutes, I got this thing completely cleaned. I just use a single edge razor blade and scrape it off. The trick is to just use regular latex paint that comes off pretty easily, and so if you ever want to change colors, it doesn't take much work. Just scrape it off and clean it real good, and spray it with some Windex or some rubbing alcohol just to make sure it's nice and clean. There's still some white on the trim. This is going to be on the back, so you're not even really going to see it, so I'm not too worried about that. But now I'm going to paint this surface, clean it again, make sure it's nice and clean to be able to get the paint down. There's not much to putting paint on it. You don't have to be precise. I know I see people that, you know, tape the trim and stuff. It's in the back. I'm not going to see it. I guess if it's in a place where you're going to see it, sure, you can tape the trim to keep the paint off of it. Me, I just kind of slop it on there, and you're going to do multiple coats, so it doesn't even have to be very clean, because after a few coats, you're only going to see the underside of it, which is going to be the back of the tank, and it's going to look great. So just use a paint roller, get some latex paint, and roll it on there, and it works. The next tip that I have, and I think that this is the most important tip to making a good aquascape even better, is height. The most boring part of a boring aquascape, I think, is when it's flat and there's nothing in there. Now, sometimes that's desirable. There's some fish that, of course, the focus of the tank is mostly on the fish, and so you don't really want much in there, and I do have some tanks like that, and I don't consider those to be bad aquascapes because I just didn't put any effort into them. They're mostly just because I did that on purpose. But the tanks that I always try to build up height. The more that you can aim for the top of the tank, the better the aquascape is going to look. And one of my favorite ways of doing that is by building up height, and with these bags, there's different ways of doing it. I've seen people use mesh bags. I like to use sand bags just because it provides a more solid surface for the sand to go against. If you use mesh bags and you cover it with sand, the sand is going to fall through and potentially take more sand to be able to fill the tank. You could just pile up even more sand, but sand is expensive, so I tend to use these. I fill them with lava rock, which provides just kind of a more solid surface. So this solid surface plus the lava rock inside, then I can cover this with sand and it'll get me some more height so I can build up towards the top. Other things that you can use to get height in your tank is really tall plants. If you use Vallisneria or something like that that reaches towards the top of the tank, that can provide a lot of height. Large root structures will also provide a lot of height in the tank. I have one of those that looks pretty amazing, just a large root that goes all the way to the top. Large piles of rocks. So I'm going to use this to build up some height in the tank, and then I'm going to cover it with sand. The other part of this substrate is that it's going to be a dirted substrate. Now I'm going to cap it with the sand that I've got, but the plants that I put in here, I want them to have a lot of nutrients. They're heavy root feeders, and so I'm going to put some soil in here, just organic potting soil, that's going to provide those nutrients. The organic potting soil that I use, I like to get the wood chips and things out of it, so I actually had to sift it through a strainer, which is a great way to get carpal tunnel syndrome if you ever want to get that. But I sift it through a strainer to get the wood chips out of it, so I get this nice soft powdery dirt that I can put in the bottom. So I'm going to use the bag buildup, put the dirt around it. I'm going to kind of remember where I put the dirt and then cover it all with sand and cap it, and it's going to look awesome. The next thing you want to do to make sure you have an awesome tank is have awesome substrate. The old substrate that was in there was pool filter sand, and although that's not the worst substrate in the world, it really doesn't look great, especially after a while. So I use the Carib Sea sand. It's really nice sand, especially this sunset gold. When you wash it, I always wash it in a bucket, but I leave the sand still in the bag. And that way it makes it really easy to carry the sand to the tank. You just keep it in the bag and dump it in the tank while it's in the bag. It might make more sense in a bucket, but honestly I really like doing that because I can kind of fit it into the tank a lot easier and put it where I want to go. So I always wash this before I put it in the aquarium, but it's worth it to spend the money and do the work to get nice substrate. It just makes the tank look so much better.
As I mentioned before, building up height is not just building up rocks or sand, but you can also use plants to reach to the top of the tank. In this case, I'm going to be using a couple different types of Vallisneria. I have actually never successfully grown Vallisneria before, and I think the reason is because I've never really given it a nutrient-rich substance or maybe enough light, but I'm hoping that with this tank I can change that, and so I'm planting a bunch of Vallisneria along the back as well as some in the foreground, and my hopes is that it'll reach towards the top of the tank and just give me that height that I'm looking for. Lots of interesting places for the fish to swim through and around, and just give me an amazing aquascape to look at.
The fish that I will be adding to the 60 breeder is this amazing African cichlid called the Cyclopharynx schwetzi. Beautiful little fish, white bodies, they breed prolifically. I've had them for about a year and I started with about 7 of them. They're also, fun fact, incredibly difficult to catch. So I did not have a great time catching them, but I've got them now and we will be adding them into that 60 breeder and they are going to look spectacular in there. So let's go.
My last piece of advice is that an amazing aquascape won't matter at all if you have a terrible light on there. So I highly recommend getting the best light that you can possibly get for whatever tank that you have. I really enjoyed building this tank and using this opportunity to share with you guys some of the tips and tricks that I use to make an amazing aquascape, and I hope that you enjoyed it as well. I'd love to hear from any of you down in the comment section below if there's any simple tips that you have for others that are looking to build an amazing aquascape, and I'll see you in the next one. Fishlist out!